Hello, welcome to this webinar. My name is Nicky and I'll be sharing with you today some return to work and managing change tips for your return to school. So today we'll be looking at what is resilience. We'll be acknowledging some COVID-19 losses. We'll be looking at resiliency factors for your staff during the COVID-19 pandemic and how you're going to support your pupils bounce back from these losses. So I just need to introduce that there could be a trigger warning here, talk of loss and grief in this webinar, so be mindful of your own needs. If you need to leave or turn the video off, then please self-regulate and self-monitor. So resilience is the process of handling stress and recovering from trauma or adversity, and it's important we recognise that all-important bounce back factor. So first of all, we need to acknowledge that this period through COVID-19 has been quite grief-inducing in terms of losses that we have felt as a community. And that's not just losses from school life, it's loss of communities, sporting venues, it's losses that you feel within your families of not being able to connect. There's many losses and layers to this, and that's what we call collective grief. And we're going through a collective trauma as we're experiencing this worldwide pandemic. So there's a nice quote here from Dr. Robert Weiss, and he says, "Today we are all grieving. We are all grieving the loss of our freedoms, a predictable future, and the lives and the roles left behind in our communal rush away from the coronavirus." So it's just acknowledging today in this space that we'll be using that it's okay not to be okay. Just be mindful of how you're feeling and what's going on for you at the moment and where you are in terms of your return to school headspace. So let's start off with some data here. This was some research carried out by Forster on behalf of the Safe Children, and it looked at top concerns for children and families during the coronavirus crisis. So we can see here, if we look through this data, that really the top concerns there, they don't know how long this is going to last. The parents were 64% of parents surveyed were worried about that, only 6% of children. We go to the highest bit of data that we see there, which is not seeing their friends. So 85% of children were really concerned about that, whereas parents were more 48%. So we can see that this loss through school routine and loss of connections has been quite anxiety inducing for children. They've also, 76% of children that were surveyed missed their friends. Some are bored, some are having more time spent with their family, and it's important to acknowledge that not everybody will be having a traumatic experience. Some will be enjoying the time at home with family if they have healthy attachments at home and they're living in a safe household with good income, money to bring food in and housing. All those basic needs are met, and this won't be too traumatic for some people. So it's normal for us to feel grief during a crisis, and it's really important that we recognise that in a school community about reaching out to talk to people you trust, whether that be your line manager, whether it's me, myself, or friends, family, or fellow community members. So it's also okay for us to grieve. Now, we will have many grieving periods in terms of cancelled holidays. There could be sort of a graduation ceremony, children's birthdays, your sense of freedom, time with loved ones, and even people have had to cancel weddings. So there's lots of losses, and it's okay for us to grieve this period. So loss of group and community shared experiences, sports being played, venues that have been looked at. And it's about us thinking of those that have really worse off than us, the people in this period that may be unwell or have experienced trauma themselves, maybe feeling helpless, people that are in overcrowded situations or without a home, triggered, including sort of falling down a time hole. And this is a lovely graphic by Dr. Karen Treisman, and she talks about this in terms of it being trauma-inducing and re-traumatizing for some. So it's about acknowledging the many losses in our communities. Again, the 5 stages of grief. This is a theory that was postulated by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she talked about this in terms of terminal illness, but it has been applied to many different ways of grieving. So the stages are denial, anger, bargaining, despair, acceptance. And we may sort of feel that separately. We may go through those stages at any one time. We will feel this individually, but also together collectively. So I'd like to take you a bit further through this change model curve, and it can be applied to our emotional responses to change. For those of us that are talking about going back to school, this is another change that we're having to manage. So first of all, when you hear the news of something that's going to change, you may be in a state of shock. That surprise or shock at the event happening. It could move into denial, frustration, depression, experimental stage, decision stage, and then finally integration. So have a look at this and reflect on where you're feeling at the moment. Where are you sat on that change curve? So the first stage we talked about is shock. So during this stage, sort of individuals and teams are sort of taken back by the announcement, whether that be in your workplace or the school, and they may express surprise. There may be an impetus for change, and the shock is discomforting. It's really hard for people, and they won't enjoy that discomfort that comes with that feeling. The next stage we move on to is that sense of denial. So sometimes it's like too much to deal with. People will like to withdraw, they don't want change, and it can be entrenched in sort of operating procedures in terms of what's going to happen next. We don't want to deal with that. The next stage could be anger, and this is where we, as employees or staff members, we may move into this feeling of being angry at our senior leadership team, or angry at the government, some parental body that represents that decision that's been made and the change that we don't want to come to terms with. The next stage could be a bargaining stage. This is where individuals and teams maybe avoid the change, they delay it or don't want to come to an alternative. And sometimes they stave off the changes, and sometimes that affects productivity, it affects our application to our roles. And the next stage is what we call depression. So sometimes as an individual, we may sort of question our existential purpose, and we may become less motivated. And this does sort of make us withdraw and have a low point. And then we may move into a sense of acceptance at this point. The change is happening, it's integrated, we've started it, we're working through it, and there's a sense of let's get on and try, and let's try these new methods and procedures. And the final stage is that sense of acceptance that we've gone through that integrated change. It's fully integrated, it works, it's moving forward. And the old situation's sort of forgotten about and not thought about much. And we can apply this to any sort of, if we think about the first part of the pandemic, there could have been that shock, denial, as everyone's got used to working online or working on screens. Then you've gone through that change model. And once again, we find ourselves again coming out of this pandemic. There'll be more changes. The people will be feeling very unsettled about leaving their own bubbles. So everybody's grief journey is going to be very different, and it's important to acknowledge that. So if you see here this graphic, we'll all be somewhere different. There may be a word that resonates with you. So have a look through that grief journey and what stands out for you, because it's important we acknowledge that grief is individual. It's felt differently for everybody. So this is a nice graphic to explain that there may be times throughout this period that it's felt normal, it's been okay, it feels like nothing's happening. And then there's other times when it hits us and it completely can be overwhelming. It's important to take it easy and be gentle with yourselves, because we are all doing the best we can. So this is a nice model that explains grief in terms of how we expect grief to feel, how we expect loss, and then the reality of it. So before the loss, there's a circle there, and then the loss happens, and then we get this all-encompassing black hole. And maybe there's an expectation that that will shrink and go, and we'll go back to normal life. That's not the reality of it. And Lois Tonkin talks about the growth around grief. So if we think about that in terms of growing, the grief stays the same, but we grow around it. And that can be felt in terms of our resiliency. So if you look at the purple graphic here from Crew's bereavement, it's about growing into that. So the jar in figure 3 has got a greater capacity where the grief stayed the same size. So it'll be a bit like us with this pandemic. We will grow around this period, and we will have that sense of resiliency. And if this resonates with you, there's more information on the Crew's bereavement charity website. So these are really helpful. These are helpful for you to use with yourselves or with family members. If you know somebody that's been very ill through this period and you haven't been able to connect with them due to the lockdown, It may be that good for you to sort of review where you can connect with that person. And there's some suggestions on here, and these can be found at the Children's Bereavement Charity as well, and also the National Children's Bureau. So maybe, for example, you could listen to music or eat the food of the person, favourite food that the other person you know likes in terms of the illness. So that can foster a sense of connection for you both. And ideas to help heal with your own grieving. So this is particularly through bereavement. So loss through bereavement can be very trauma-inducing. So help yourselves by looking through here and thinking of some ideas that you can pass on to somebody. So tell me what, for example, the top left there, tell me what helps me feel better and keeps me feel safe. And then maybe laugh and have fun, and I don't feel bad about it. So again, look at that and see if that can be useful for you. And this is one for children to give to a parent or carer, so it can help children sort of verbalise what they need. So they may just want to have fun and laugh. And they may tick a box about asking you to help them start a memory box or a book for the person that's been lost. So again, these can be downloaded from the Childhood Bereavement Network. So what does help us and children bounce back from trauma? Well, there's many different factors, and there's protective factors, and then there's the risk factors. Now, obviously, the risk factors are that we're all living through a pandemic. Protective factors may be that you're living in a strong, stable house, and you have income, you have food on the table. So that we're looking at the different risk factors and protective factors. So in resiliency, the key thing for bouncing back is effective relationships. So it's important you foster those relationships and heal the disconnection that's happened throughout this period. And it's about having resilient thinking, how we manage our emotions, and how we can build on our current strengths. And especially for children, it's about their temperament, it's about the connections around them and the community that hold them and support them. Now, this is a lovely resiliency framework. I really recommend this. Have a look on the Boing Boing website, and it really is useful in terms of looking at what helps children bounce back from any trauma. And the basics there, we've talked about this already: good housing, money to live, being safe, getting transport, healthy diet, exercise, enough sleep, play and hobbies, and not feeling judged. So those are the basics, and then we can move on to how we belong, learn, cope, and then lastly the core self. So have a look on the Action for Happiness website. We follow the 5 ways to wellbeing at Holmwood House School. We like to use that as a wellbeing program that helps our children. We look at ways that we can give, take notice, connect, keep learning, and be active. Now, Action for Happiness use 10 keys for happy living, which is based on the 5 ways to wellbeing, but they've expanded it. So if you look here at the Great Dream, we can give, relate, exercise, have good awareness, trying out new things, have a sense of direction, resiliency, emotions, acceptance, and meaning. There's some great posters there if you wanted to download those for you. So children, how do children bounce back, and what's that resiliency for them? It's about having good coping strategies, and it's about letting them choose what works for them. So what works for one child may not work for another. So do they like to read? Do they do breathing exercises or a sense of mindfulness or some meditation? Label the feeling, help them to sort of recognise how they're feeling and have a sense of that within the body. We call that a sense of interoception. So where do children feel that sense of sadness? They may not be able to verbalise it, but can they describe where it sits in the body? Positive self-talk, can they reframe that language? Can they change that from a negative to a positive? And playing games is really good for sense of connection and healing. And then we've got yoga, so maybe cosmic yoga online. And artwork is really fantastic for well-being. So engage children in a sense of creativity, play, and metaphor. So we use Buzz Club on our Wellbeing Club at school. You may have your own wellbeing activities. Now you can access all of these videos on the Buzz Club 5 Ways to Wellbeing YouTube account, on the Holmwood House YouTube account. These are all good ways to help children bounce back and have a sense of resiliency. So writing down feelings, having a feelings journal, creating a box of calm, using a calm down glitter bottle, doing mindfulness techniques. All of these are available, and these are what I'd recommend for children and for yourselves. And children need to be able to get outside and play and bounce back. Being able to get outside and move. Exercise is so good for well-being, and it also increases that sense of resilience, self-regulation, and helps in dealing with stress. We use the blob tree as well at school, so having a chance to be able to share how you're feeling through the sense of the metaphor and the blobs. So this blob tree has been adapted for use with coronavirus, so that we can use and name a letter. I've added the J blob, you can see there in the distance. That's a blob that's obviously socially isolating. And then having this mood ladder here, you can see on the right. This enables us to check in with how we're feeling. So one, bottom of the ladder, feeling calm and happy. And as the emoticons go up, they become maybe tired, embarrassed, lonely, sad, hungry. And then as it goes up 7, it's sad, really sad, upset. And then 8, there's no coming down. You have to go up to number 10 to discharge. And it's how anger looks, really. It can be held inside and hidden. It can be expressed. You can deal with anger in many different ways. So it depends on how you deal with your own anger. But it's good for children to be able to reflect on this. And what number do they get to on the mood ladder before they have to instigate their own self-soothing strategies? So it's okay. All of these feelings on this mood ladder are completely normal. And it's really good to normalise that with children. They may have a sense of feeling 5 or 6, maybe what they get to number 6, what can they do to foster that cool down plan? So the path to resilience in the face of COVID-19, we know that these scientifically backed up techniques can really help, and they can instill a sense of calm, they can control and give hope as well. So breathing exercises are so good for regulating you and giving you that sense of calm. And set some small goals, and doesn't have to be big, just making small goals for each day. And reframe that thinking, have a sense of, okay, this feels uncomfortable, let's try and change that to a positive. And practice gratitude. Now it's been proven that if we say 3 good things daily, then we can have a sense of well-being. It does improve that positivity. So again, you can use this with your children at school, but it's also good for you to reflect on, things to look forward to, and we all need that sense of hope. So there's a circle of control. This is a graphic that I've created that looks at things that are inside of our control, things that you can control, the green circle, and things that are outside of our control, the orange circle. So sometimes when we have anxiety, or we feel worried, scared, we are focusing on the orange circle. So we wonder how long this is going on for. We can't control the actions of other people, how other people feel, how they're going to play, how they're going to socially distance, how other people's ideas are coming up. Even the weather we can't control, and the words of other people. So that sometimes is the circle we focus on when we notice ourselves becoming anxious. If we can bring our attention back to the green circle here, we can focus on having positive thoughts. We can focus on washing our own hands, being kind to ourselves and others, and having our own social distancing and keeping an eye on that. And also asking for help if we need it. So if we focus on this green circle, we know that it can really focus on reducing that anxiety. So this is one for adults as well, that we can look at what we can control. So you can control your positive attitude, following Public Health England guidelines, your own social distancing, turning off the news, limiting your social media, and your own kindness, and finding fun things to do at home. And what we have to let go of the things that we can't control. So Action for Happiness promote a monthly calendar. I really recommend these. If you get a chance, go online, you can download them. You can even create your own calendar at home. It's really important to focus on things that keep us positive and happy. So throughout June, even though we're living in difficult times, Action for Happiness are asking us to focus on something that can be creating a joyful June. So this is a lovely graphic by Dr. Chris Moore, and it looks at positive psychology through a positive psychology lens, and the father of positive psychology is Martin Seligman. So he talks about the PERMA model and how we can have a well-being theory. So this is based on having positive emotions, a sense of engagement in an activity, the relationships around us, having a sense of meaning, and finally moving on to the accomplishment. So if you can look at the suggestions Dr. Chris Moore puts here, it's really useful for us to focus on some of these. This graphic's available on Dr. Moore's website. So epinsight.com. So have a look at this. It's really good to be able to focus on what makes you feel a sense of well-being. So it's important to really acknowledge here that all trauma is recoverable. And the recovery model is based on a holistic person-centered approach. And there's two simple premises to it, really. It's possible to recover, and the most effective recovery is with person-centered, directed, healthy, reparative relationships. So what's going to get us through this trauma and back into school and supporting our children is connection with one another. And that's really important. And again, in time, this too shall pass. So it's really important to acknowledge that things won't stay the same. It will pass, and we will get through this together as a community. So thank you for listening here. It's really important to have time to listen and have some time for your own well-being. So if you need some support, I remain available. So please use the link here. And for anybody that's interested, there's references here for further information on the slides that I've used within this webinar. So thank you for listening today. It's been my pleasure to spend time with you, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.